Hey guys, what's going on? This is going to be my review of Captain America Brave New World, or where I think it should have been called Falcon Brave New World. Now, you may want to click off immediately, but I promise you, please hear me out on what I have to say and why I have to say it. You may not agree with me, and that's fine, but I think there's a lesson to be learned here that Marvel is going to continue to miss, and a lot of these other studios are going to continue to miss. Not just in movies, not just in video games, but in comic books as well, which really comes down to the validity of a character and the value that a character has. And so, to me, Sam Wilson should be Falcon. I think if you're reviewing this film and you're looking at it in the most purest, optimistic way as possible, which is really in our world today can be hard to do, but that's what I prefer to do. I prefer to look at things optimistically, but I am going to be honest about certain situations. And so if something comes off as negative, it's just because I am being very honest and, nothing more and nothing less. But to me, if you're going to look at this film in a pure way, in a more optimistic way, the best way to look at this film is to look at it as a Falcon film. And I do think that's what it should have been called. Now, let me stress this. I think him carrying the shield is fine. Having ownership of the shield, I think totally works within the MCU. I think his costume being more patriotic is fine as well. I think there's no problems with either of those things. But to me, every element of Sam's skill set and forte is that of Falcon, something that he made on his own accord. Falcon carries just as much value as Captain America. At least that's what I truly believe. So, someone who's grown up reading some of those other comics back in the day, I truly do believe that Falcon has just as much validity as something like a Captain America. And yeah, maybe his comics don't sell as well if they're under the branch of Falcon. But to be honest, the comics have had just as hard enough time being sold as him as Captain America anyway. I think the movie audience can see him as Falcon and see him as a hero that he truly is. And there's going to be nothing that makes my point even greater to the end of the movie, but we'll get to that later. So that's my hot take, and we're going to walk through this movie, and I think I'm going to come back to that. But I am someone who personally doesn't feel like a title really should be changed only in a few circumstances. To me, a title can be changed when someone was once a villain and now they have changed. They have become something new. They need to leave the old name behind and call upon a new name to give themselves a new identity. I think that worked in the comics with Winter Soldier. But of course, the person who wrote those comics really did love Bucky Barnes. Bucky Barnes was like that dude's hero, so for him, it made sense that he wrote that character so deeply and gave him a reason to have his name changed to Captain America. I don't know if all these people truly love Sam Wilson in that same way, but at the same time, Sam Wilson is not at the same place that someone like Bucky Barnes was, where he was once a villain searching for a new identity. Falcon has his identity, and it's something that is special and unique to him. Getting into the other aspect of changing a name to me would be something like a father and son situation. The father is gone, so now the son takes the mantle of the father's name. I think you can look at that with, the Batman comics. When Batman disappears and goes away, one of the sons takes a hold of the mantle of Batman. Sometimes it's Dick Grayson, sometimes it'll be other characters, but someone takes a hold of that mantle because the father can no longer carry the mantle anymore. But when someone's your partner, when someone's your best friend, and they've made their own identity through and through, and has been acknowledged as that person throughout the different movies, there doesn't really seem to be a need to change who that character is fundamentally, because the reality is you're not. The only thing you're going to be changing is his title, but the titles carry their own weight, and it's unnecessary weight I believe that a character should have to carry on their own when they're really trying to do something new for themselves. And so fundamentally for me, that's where I stand when it comes to that. That's why I feel like the movie should have been called Falcon. I don't believe his name should have ever been called Captain America. And I don't think that takes anything away from him. Actually, I think that adds to him. But we'll get to that later on in this review. Something I want to point out is, and this is going to get into the actual movie itself. The opening battle and some of the fighting sequences, I was really concerned that they were going to be really awful. And some of them aren't great, but they're not as bad as I thought they would be, which I think is a good thing. I had very low expectations going and seeing this film, and I think those low expectations helped me have actually a better experience. So I'm actually kind of thankful that I went in with such low expectations because of, a lot of the different reviews I heard. I checked myself before walking into the theater. Some people ask if they wasted Demolition Man. Now, if you notice that there's a lot of different characters that pop up in the movie, and then you realize, oh, that character was supposed to be Copperhead, or oh, that character was supposed to look totally different the way he does in that comic. There was the Navy SEAL that had the same name as Demolition Man. Now, I do want to say, I hope that fans, I don't know if we're ever going to get, and maybe this is why it doesn't matter, I don't know if we're ever going to get another Sam Wilson Captain America movie. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but in the movie, that character does mention that he has a brother that's going into the Air Force. Now, I am not up to date on Demolition Man, but I would say that maybe that's his brother. Which, by the way, we will be getting into spoilers in this review. But I would say that maybe the loss of this Navy SEAL that we'll talk about later, maybe that's not the end that we'll see of Demolition Man. Maybe we will see him again. But if we do see him again, I don't know if they're going to go all the way out and give him his costume that they chose not to even give him in this movie. Honestly, they didn't give anybody their comic accurate costumes. The biggest question I have about this film is really, what does this film have to say? And I don't really think it has very much to say at all, which honestly is what maybe is going to save this movie, because I do think that the reshoots took out a lot of the messaging in the film, and I do feel like the messaging was quite political in a divisive way, not in a asking questions way, not in a making you think deeper way, but more in a separation way from the audience. That is a growing issue as we get further and further in our political divide that we're in as a nation right now, which I do think we're coming together, but certain people like Hollywood like to tear us apart. But I think they saw the signs that this movie needed to do really well, and I think they cut out a lot of those things. I think that's why we're missing a lot of characters. I think that's why we're missing certain story points that I think were probably in the original part of this film. I do think there was some messages in this film. I think some of the conversations that Isaiah Bradley had with Sam Wilson during the chaining sequences, I do think some of that was put together in a good way. And I think you see that play out at the end when he's finally fighting the Red Hulk. But there's a lot that are missing after that. And even the conversations with, someone like the president, like Thunderbolt Ross and Sam Wilson, I still think there was a lot of meat missing there that could have been filled with better questions, more moral thoughts that could have let us have a deeper conversation as we left. This is not comparable to a Captain America Civil War. This is not comparable to a Captain America Winter Soldier, though it is interesting to me that some of those things seem to be played out or laid out as similar aspects to this film that were in those films as well, which I kind of find interesting. To me, Isaiah Bradley is still a unique and really great character. He's a tragedy type character that, I really appreciate, and I think the actor did an incredible job. But I think the choices the director made didn't really hit on that aspect as much, and maybe that's because that's where some of the preachy messaging came through, and maybe they cut that part out, I'm guessing. I don't know. But I do think there could have been something there that I think everyone would have resonated to if they were brave enough or willing enough to show it, and I don't think it would have caused a divide. I think it would have brought people together. And I think there could have been more done with Isaiah in this film. To me, that message with Isaiah, instead of it being an uplifting message, there really wasn't enough they did with it to make it a really uplifting and powerful message they could have made in the film. Joaquin Torres, to me, was fine. The character was fine. I think, he could have been better used, in my opinion, and I think he should have been left out of certain other situations. I think that him being at the White House for that, event, maybe Sam Wilson's allowed to invite whoever he wants to invite, but it did seem kind of odd to me. I think actually, I know they want to separate these characters, but to me, I think that this would have been a scene that Bucky Barnes actually should have been a part of, honestly. It would have made more sense that Bucky Barnes was here. But then again, if Bucky Barnes is there, then maybe, they use him instead of, Isaiah Bradley. I don't know. Maybe he didn't need to be in the film for that reason alone. I don't know. When it comes to Sabra, Ruth Bat Seraph, she really should have had powers. I think having her be a Black Widow was a mistake. I think it was a huge mistake. And I think just going with the original idea of the character would have been fine. I don't think you have to make her Captain Israel, for example. But I think you could have had her be in the same role that she was in. It would have worked absolutely fine. It wouldn't have been a big deal. And honestly, it would have made a lot more sense for the character, for me personally, when she's chunking these 200-something pound men around like it's nothing. And actually, I think it would have made a bigger point. If a lot of the people that are in Sam Wilson's life have powers and he doesn't, I think that would have been a good reminder of the whole point they try to make with that character about him not having powers, about him not having abilities, about him not choosing to take the super soldier serum. To me, the thing with Ruth Bat Seraph is that she could have been a big point to that when she's chunking these dudes around like it's literally nothing, when she's a tiny lady. And I don't care if you're a Black Widow. I can believe that a Black Widow could beat up a lot of those dudes. Okay, I can believe that. But to chunk them around like it's absolutely nothing, in the way she did it too, because the fight scenes with the old Black Widows are definitely a little bit more believable than even hers was. And I think just giving her powers, it would have been fine. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal. We live in a powerful, magical world. Don't hide from it. You can do all the political stuff, all the serious stuff you want to do, while still playing with that. Which comes to a point I want to make, that comic accuracy is less lazy story option. When you have story choices you have to make, going the comic book route actually might save you. It actually might be the less lazy option than going the Black Widow route, for example. And I do hope that something like Marvel and DC will subscribe to that later on in the future. It gives them unique backstories. It gives them a unique perspective. It gives them unique alliances. They may not decide where they stand based off where you stand because of their past history. And just giving them their comic background will allow those conversations to happen and may generate actually unique action beats where you're not having to copy everything from Captain America Winter Soldier. The leader works as a Captain America villain. I know some people make lazy excuses. They don't want to call out the big issues. And so whenever you change a villain that's supposed to be this Hulk villain or it's supposed to be this Batman villain, yes, they're made for that character for a reason, because maybe they have something that character doesn't have. For example, the Hulk, when he turns into the Hulk, he is not as intelligent as he is with Bruce Banner. And so someone like the leader may be a good villain for someone like Bruce Banner specifically to go against, because you have to, at that point, set aside your power that usually helps you defeat the villain, and you have to go back to your inner self to conquer the main bad guy. That said, I think there's a unique opportunity that Captain America, the comics in general, could have had with the leader, because you have someone like, Red Skull, who's a fascist, right? He's supposed to be this fascist dictator, evil villain. Well, what's the other side of that? What's the other side of an authoritarian regime? Well, it'd be something like a communistic regime. Someone like the leader could honestly be a good foil for that. And I'm not sure and let's be honest, I doubt Marvel would ever go that direction. for political reasons. I doubt they would ever go that direction. But I do think going that direction with him would make him a really good Captain America villain. And I do suggest that going in the future. It could have gave him a little bit more perspective, and honestly could have had a more interesting philosophical and political conversation if they went that direction. Because if they're accusing Thunderbolt Ross of being this other extreme, well, having him be the opposite of that extreme and letting Sam Wilson be in the middle and have him navigate those ideologies and those directions of the villain versus the hero and all the aspects of that could have made something very interesting and could have made some deeper points that people could have left the theater having conversations about without even getting super political with it, right? Like, I'm not saying to make him Captain Communist. I'm just saying if you lean him that direction the same way that Red Skull leans the other direction, there's interesting things. Or, for example, Thunderbolt Ross, have him lean that direction if you want, which clearly they did. You know, I think there would come interesting conversations where people can talk about deep philosophical things without having to bring up real world issues. And I think people need that. People need to be able to have conversations about deep things without bringing up political things that are happening in real life. And I would have been down for that, and I think it would have made the character more interesting. And I actually hope that the Captain America comics use the leader a little bit more, because I think he would be a good foil, a good nemesis for Captain America. You know, having a plan matters, and you can tell that they didn't really totally have a plan with this. Or if they did have a plan, they saw how disastrous the plan was going to be, and they decided to wrap it up and change it completely. This film does feel very reshot. It feels like it was more of a quick episode of a show, you know, a longer episode of a TV show. It felt like a TV movie to me, personally. Until we get to the last big couple fight sequences, it felt like a TV movie to me. And it was shot really well. Like, I thought the cinematography was actually really, really well done. You know, the editing was bad. The editing was really, really choppy. But, you know, it just felt like it was reshot to hell and back. Is the best way to put it. It was really reshot, and you could feel it. You could feel it in the movie. It was rough. It was rough. You know, some of the shots, it's like, you know, there was a conversation that Sam Wilson and Harrison Ford had that I wish they would just, instead of changing it every 5 seconds, from this shot to this shot to this shot, I wish they would have just paused for a little while on one shot, letting us focus on the intensity of the conversation that was being had. And maybe it's because of the reshoots, or maybe because maybe that wasn't the exact conversation they had originally. Them jumping around to the different shots they had, it just seemed waste. And honestly, probably just wasted money. Think about how many times they had that conversation where they just shot the movie over and over and over again, filming that same sequence over and over again to have all the different shots they wanted, when really they could have just focused on one real good shot between Captain America and the president and having that conversation. They didn't plan the movie out. That's just how it feels to me. It feels like they didn't plan it out. You know, Harrison was not Thunderbolt to me at all. You know, it's sad that the previous actor passed away, and that is rough. And then you hire an actor really because of who he is, because he's Harrison Ford, instead of hiring an actor who could have really played the character well. And I do think that was also a mistake. And I think you could have saved a lot of money on your budget, a lot of other things you could have done to have an actor who really wanted the role instead of someone who's just there for a paycheck, and honestly is quite too old for the role. So I do think having Harrison there was a mistake. Even though Harrison does do a good job in certain parts, I do think that it was a mistake to me, and he doesn't really feel like Thunderbolt Ross to me. Maybe certain moments he does, but the majority of the time, he doesn't really feel like Thunderbolt Ross to me at all. But maybe that's just because the original actor did such a fantastic job. Maybe that's why. Something I feel for Marvel is that Marvel has a problem that DC doesn't have. Because Marvel doesn't really have many fictional worlds, or fictional, when I say worlds, I don't mean worlds. It doesn't have many fictional countries. You have Madripoor, you have a few other different places, but you don't have a ton. You don't have a ton. You have Latveria, for example. You have this resource with titanium or adamantium. I'm sorry, adamantium, and people are fighting over it. And instead of making it a more realistic type of people going after it, like the Chinese, the Russians, you're using people that really wouldn't have the resources to go to war with America over resources. Japan does not have the ability to do that. China does. But then you can't make China the villain. But the reality was that China wouldn't have been the villain. In some ways, America would have been the villain. And I think China would have been fine with them being a part of this film. Personally, I do think that, low-key. Maybe they wouldn't, because at the end of the day, Captain America does kind of fight against them a little bit just to survive while they're doing the crazy cool flight sequences. But I do think that that's something that, could have happened and could have been fine. But it's definitely something I don't definitely feel for Marvel, because in a toxic climate that we're in, you can see that maybe it is a little more difficult to have certain scenes like that, knowing that in order for this movie to make money, you have to have it in some of these other countries. Some of these other countries have to have your film shown there in order for people to go and see it. So I know that's difficult, but it doesn't make any sense. Japan being the main villain, or not the main villain, but the main, counterpoint to America's issues, political issues, trying to make a treaty work, doesn't really make sense unless they give it a reason to make sense, and they didn't do that either. The flying around the dead Celestial was cool. That was honestly probably some of the coolest shots in the film. I loved the way that Sam used the shield and the different ways that he used the shield. I thought it was really creative and really unique. And I thought the action scenes were really, really good. But everything, it was fine. The reasonings why they were doing everything was fine, but it definitely had a lot more stakes than all the other action scenes in all the different parts of this movie. And the moments where you think that, the Hulk is going to Hulk out in that ship, he would have killed everybody on that ship. And so when he doesn't Hulk out and he doesn't kill everybody on that ship, you're just like, whew, it gives you that sigh of relief, because it's coming. Because of the trailers and everything else, what's about to happen with that character. But again, in the fight scenes, in every aspect of that scene, I'm not thinking Captain America. Even when he's using the shield, I'm not thinking Captain America. I'm thinking Sam Wilson Falcon. I'm thinking how awesome Sam Wilson Falcon is. I'm not thinking about how awesome Captain America is. To me, it's still totally different. And when he's using his skill set, it shows you why he needs to be different and why he is so special. Set apart from that other character. There was a lot of unneeded moments to me. There was a lot of moments that honestly I think didn't need to be in the film. I think having the moments where the leader knocks on that person's door and the person opens it and he kills him and kills the wife, and he's just at the house, and I guess he used their phone to call the president. Wasn't needed. The scene where people are wondering if we lost Demolition Man because you have that Navy SEAL and the leader basically is like, I don't take any pride in killing you, but I need to kill you to accomplish this goal. It didn't really feel like that scene was needed. A lot of unneeded scenes that filled up the movie instead of having something there that would have had a little bit more substance to it. Even having the leader turn himself in wasn't needed. He already did what he needed to do to make the Hulk freak out, and he's a free man. You could have set up a whole new movie, a whole new sequel for Captain America, Sam Wilson's Captain America, by trying to track down the leader, in a sequel. You didn't need him to turn himself in. He already accomplished his goal. Let him win. That is what would make that character unique. Let him win. And he did win. He did win. In some ways. But it's just odd. It was just lazy. It didn't make any sense to have himself turned in, and you're missing opportunities. As telling a story, you're missing opportunities you could have had later on, and then you filled up moments with him that weren't really important at all. And that is the bummer I think that I have with the leader, is that not only does he kind of look a little weird, he kind of looks like Simon from DC. I don't know if you know who that character name is or who that character is, but there's a character named Simon who can control people's minds. In DC, he's a big like Young Justice, Teen Titan type villain, and he would have been a really great villain to use in this. Not in this movie, of course, but Simon's a great villain to use in different things dealing with DC. But the leader should not have looked like Simon to me. The leader should have looked like the leader. And I think that would have still worked and would have been a really interesting way to do that character for me personally. But that's just me. And speaking of unneeded conversations, I'm not going to go as far to say this conversation wasn't needed, but I think this conversation should have been different. When Bucky shows up to conceal and kind of, amp up or encourage Sam, to me, they kind of dangled an insult over Steve that I wasn't really a fan of, because I do believe that Captain America, he has helped people aspire to something greater, but he inspired people too. And it was just a weird thing to say to me. It's like, it really doesn't mean anything. You know when someone compliments somebody and they really say something to you and you're like, okay, well, what's different than the other thing? And it's like, you know what? There really isn't a difference to the other thing. And that's what it felt like to me. It felt like it was I'm encouraging you, but I'm really not saying anything. And that's what it felt like to me. I felt like Bucky really wasn't saying anything. He was just saying, hey, people look up to Captain America, Steve's Captain America, but they can look up to you too. And it's like, okay, cool. But you're taking, to make that point work, you're saying that Steve didn't inspire people, which I just don't get that or agree with that. And I don't even think that's really the point they were trying to make. But then that's all you're thinking about when you're hearing them talk. And so maybe if they would have had a deeper message in this movie to begin with, maybe Bucky could have said something a little bit more unique, because it would have fit better with the film itself. It just didn't really work for me. It was cool to see Bucky. Bucky's like one of my favorite Marvel characters. Okay, Marvel characters, not necessarily just MCU, but Marvel character. But it was just fine. It was fine. The Red Hulk was fine, and that's kind of what's really going to come down in the movie. A lot of this was just fine. The Red Hulk was fine. Like I said, there was a lot of unneeded moments with the leader, and I think, honestly, at the end, having him be victorious and not having them catch him at the end, I think would have worked a lot better, and would have made this moment even more impactful when all the cards that Thunderbolt Ross has played is all coming down on him. And now he's going to have to face the music. But the problem is, the music for him is what's going to turn him into a violent, killing monster. And so the scene was cool. The fight scenes were cool. It was dangerous. It was, really impactful in a lot of different ways. But again, the way that Sam beats him is by the elements that make him a Falcon. Makes him the Falcon, not necessarily what makes him Captain America. And so that's something that's definitely interesting to me. And, if you're going to have, and I'm guessing this happened because of the reshoots, but if you're going to have Betty Ross show up, right? If you're going to have Betty Ross show up in the movie, and you even have that phone conversation with her, which I think they could have honestly probably should have left out, because I think it would have made the ending a little bit more meaningful when Thunderbolt's at the raft. But if you're already going to have that character, why don't you just do a green screen moment where she's at the cherry blossoms and she's the one that calms Thunderbolt down? To me, that makes way more sense than Captain America being the one to do it. And that's just me personally. Getting into the raft, and then getting to really the last point I really want to make about this film. Was it cool to see the raft again? Sure, I guess. But with the raft, you definitely could tell that was their one last little political message that they decided to leave in there, which you can clearly tell is what they view as about Trump. It's like, you did something bad and you should go to prison, and good on you for facing accountability. What's funny is nowadays, if you look at, for example, some of the things that were people who were pardoned under Biden, this message really could be taken either way, which I'm sure wasn't their plan originally. Their plan was to only point at one president. But now, either side politically can point at all sorts of presidents. So it kind of, that are unwilling to do such a thing as turn themselves in and go to prison. And so that, wasn't, I don't think really was needed, but it was just clear as day that that's what they were talking about. It was just obvious that's what they were talking about. And it's just funny now that message is to them probably corrupted, because now people can just point right back at other different leaders in our administrations of past, and it kind of makes it a mute point. So it doesn't even matter. We can get into political discussions of yada 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 yada, why this, why that, but it doesn't even matter, because it just, the message in itself becomes mute just from that alone. And ending it with this, and this is why I was like really saying, to me, every element, the fight scenes, the action scenes, Sam Wilson's choices, all those things are truly his. But at the very end of the movie, when he's with Joaquin, because Joaquin gets hurt during the battle when they're flying with the jets and they're flying around the celestial body, Joaquin gets hurt. He's in the hospital. He's fighting for his life. And at the end of the movie, he's okay. And Sam's talking to him, and Joaquin makes this really emotional, heartfelt statement and showed why he maybe was needed in the film in the first place. Because to be honest with you, the rest of the film, I didn't really feel like he was needed that much until this part of the movie. And he goes, to me, you were my hero. It wasn't that Captain America was his hero. It wasn't, Iron Man was his hero. No, Falcon was his hero. Falcon was the person he wanted to be. He wanted to be in the air, flying in the air, doing all the cool stuff that the Falcon did. So it wasn't the identity of Captain America that he inspired to be. It was the character of Falcon that he inspired to be. And I think that would have made a better message for this movie. I think it would have made a stronger point for this movie. And I think that's what all audiences would have appreciated. That I was inspired by you because you were you. And maybe that's where I'll leave this. Is, to me, we could try to replace, these characters with, with new black characters to replace them. We do it with Miles Morales, and to me, Miles Morales makes a little bit more sense, honestly. You have like Miles Morales, because to me, Miles can fit that father-son relationship a little better, the mentor-mentee relationship a little bit better. Same kind of way that like Batman and Robin, if that makes sense. It makes sense that Robin would eventually could become Batman. I do think we're missing something. There's so many guys. If I could pull out my encyclopedias, if I could pull out some of my comic books, there's so many different characters that are unique, that maybe could be revamped a little here, a little there, that are black characters, Hispanic characters, Asian characters. And I think those characters could thrive in this movie industry or in the comic book industry, but people have to give them time and allow them to grow. And I think one of the characters that could have done that is Falcon. And now the problem is you've taken that away from that character. You've made him be Captain America, which I do feel gives a little bit of unfair weight that he has to carry for a movie. When if you would have just let him be Captain America, if you could have just let him be Falcon, let him still carry the shield, let him still make him wear a patriotic costume, I think the weight would have been a lot lighter for him. And I do think this would have been a more successful movie. I think less prying hands would have been on the film. And honestly, maybe it could have even been a cheaper film, which I think this movie probably desperately needed. And I think people would appreciate it a lot more. But that's just me, But this is coming from someone who really loves the Falcon character, who thinks the Falcon character is unique on his own. And you don't need Captain America to make him work. He's a character, he's a leader who can work all by himself. But that's just me. But anyway, guys, did you disagree with what I said? Do you think I'm a terrible person? I don't know. It's okay if you do. And I appreciate you listening this long. I would really love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And just hear what your thoughts were about this film. See, where do we go from here? Where does Marvel go from here? I do think we're heading towards a big reboot, which means that I do think this will probably be one of the last times we'll see not Sam Wilson as Captain America, but I think this is the last time for a long time that we'll see Sam Wilson in a Captain America movie as Captain America. But anyway, guys, Love to hear your thoughts down below. And whatever you're doing, wherever you're going, I hope you're having a good one. Peace.